What we're going to be looking at now is a number of issues, but we've put it under the title of the Black Lives Matter. The text that I'd like to use for this particular one is one that you're familiar with from the gospel, where Jesus says, "Call no man father, call no man teacher, call no man rabbi." He uses this very, very clearly. And oftentimes a big thing is made about the idea of the titles of calling people like father. But if you look through the scriptures, you'll watch that Jesus consistently will call people teachers or rabbi. He doesn't have any problem with those terms. What he is talking about is the idea of the singularity. I guess if I were to put it in simple terms, Jesus is very interested in a lateral relationship, brother, sister, this sort of thing, and he is not interested in a vertical relationship. And one of the things that we get very used to, vertical relationships, and they're very comfortable. You can always pick out who's responsible and stuff like that. So it reminds me of a joke I was told in one of my classes with Fulton Sheen. Fulton Sheen said that whenever you receive an invitation to speak, it says, always go and speak. No matter what it is, no matter what they ask you to do, always go and speak. Remember, it's their fault. So you don't have to worry about it. This idea, though, is that we like vertical relationships. We think we don't, but we do. Well, they're very dangerous. And an example of that is if you watch the Catholic Church today, you would watch, like if you look at Pius XII going into the St. Peter's on the throne with the crown and all this sort of thing. Well, the next pope was John the 23rd. He would never ride in on the chair. Other than that, everything was the same. The following pope was Paul VI, who, while he was crowned pope, never again for his entire pontificate wore the crown. So that was gone. The next pope was John Paul I, and the change he made was you weren't crowned pope, but you were anointed pope. And the one after that was John Paul II. And John Paul II, in his dealing with people and stuff, stayed much more with people than above them. And John Paul II, for instance, is the first pope in many, many years ever to sit down at a table for a meal with another human being. Even though they had state banquets, he had his own table. It just wasn't done, but he did that. I thought it was so funny that Benedict got in trouble for the one he changed. The Pope always used to wear red velvet slippers with a gold trim on them. And there was a man whose job in the Vatican was to make those slippers. As you can imagine, walking around on marble with velvet slippers, they didn't keep very well. So anyway, if you remember when Benedict came in, he got red Gucci shoes. And everyone was talking about these red shoes. So you notice now the next guy comes in, which is Francis. Francis didn't even go to the red shoes. He wore just his regular brown shoes. And when they were getting him dressed, they put the white thing on him. They wanted him to change his shoes. He would not. They wanted to give him one of the golden crosses. He would not. He insisted on using his silver cross. Then they wanted to put that little ermine cape that the Pope used to wear. And he turned to them and said, "Brothers, the carnival is over." And what we're watching is the Pope. The Pope will always be the Pope. But what you want in the community are lateral relationships. And like for instance, there are a lot of places where we lose lateral relationships. It doesn't mean that someone doesn't have a more important job. I'll give you an example. If two doctors come in for a meeting with one another, they're in a lateral relationship, okay? But if I'm having prostate problems, let's say I'm a gynecologist and I'm having prostate problems, if I go into the urologist, we're both doctors, but he's the one who's running the show there, you know? And so what we want in the church, we want in our society, and I want you to know that American society is built on that. All are created equal. That's American society. So we want in the church to all feel equal, but they're different jobs. He's a pope, I'm a priest, someone's a layman, someone's a deacon, they're all different jobs, but they have nothing to do with a hierarchy. And what Jesus wanted us to do was to get really away from this hierarchy thing. And I think that is something we need to look at. It's part of a major issue that in the United States we've been facing now for about 30 years. And it's the abuse of power in hierarchy. And I want you to know I feel perfectly free to speak about this because the first place it was uncovered was in the Roman Catholic priesthood. That's the very first place it was uncovered. The Puritans who founded this country, they had a lot of wonderful things going for them, particularly the Puritans who came over with William Penn. They're the people that we have freedom of religion from. They're the ones who brought in. When they came in, there were Catholic settlements that didn't want Protestants, Baptist settlements that didn't want Anglicans. I mean, it was just all divided up that way. But they came in, and the Puritans accepted that we were made in the image of God, but had great difficulty accepting any need to change. Okay? For the Puritans, if we're made in the image of God, we're made perfect. And one of the things that we as a citizenry have actually inculcated from the Puritans, we would rather argue we're right even after we've been proven wrong. We do not like to admit we need to change. And remember Cardinal Newman's thing. Cardinal Newman said, to improve is to change, to be perfect is to have changed often. And another one I'm sure you've heard before, which is true, the only constant is change. That is the only constant. And we have to do that. And I think of, that if a 3-year-old child is acting like a 3-year-old child, we don't complain. When that person is 20 years old, they don't need to apologize for the way they acted as a 3-year-old unless they're still acting that way. At which point, an apology is the least thing that's needed there. But we have to understand that to change, it doesn't necessarily mean you were wrong before. It just means this is what's to be done now. So we have to be open to that kind of change. As the image of God, one of the things about us, we are hardwired for equality and for justice. And it's an amazing thing in our systems. I'm sure most people here have the same reaction I do. I watch TV to relax in the evening, but I always hold my remote. Because when they go in to show all these tortured animals, I cannot sit there. I have to turn it off so I can't hear it, even if I go in the kitchen. It's because we cannot stand to see the abuse of the helpless. That's against our DNA. As human beings, we do not like to see the abuse of the helpless, and we are hardwired for justice, just as ourselves. Now, one of the common things in the Jewish scriptures, they use the image of the shepherd. I think you know the image of the shepherd came from David. David was a shepherd, and he became king. And he had a great sense of taking care of the people, but he learned it as a shepherd. He didn't learn it in king school, okay? He learned it because he was a shepherd. But as a result of that, you see a huge series of condemnations in the scriptures. Jesus will even speak them. But in the Jewish scriptures, there's this huge thing about shepherds who use the sheep rather than care for them, shepherds who run away when the sheep are in trouble, shepherds who, this whole thing, and then a whole laudatory thing about the good shepherd, the one who lays down their life for their sheep and stuff. That's just this whole shepherd image. And it has to do with this business. You know, if all the sheep are here and you're the shepherd, the question is, who's the most important there? Be honest, it's the sheep. If a bunch of sick people come in and you're the doctor, what's the most important? The sick people. God doesn't make people sick so you can be a doctor. God makes doctors because you're sick. The same thing with priests, you know. God put me at the service of sinners. Okay? God didn't create sinners so I could earn a living. That was not his will. But sinners, he creates people to deal with them. And to understand that while you may have one doctor for every 100,000 sick people, the important people are still the sick people. While you may have one priest for 100,000 people, understand still the people who are important, not the priest. My value as a priest is that I'm a member of that people. And I'm entitled to forgiveness too. But I would stand above them in that sense. Okay? So to somehow do this. And Jesus particularly condemns the Pharisees. And one of the reasons he condemns the Pharisees is because they lay burdens they will not pick up. He says, I don't know if you know this, but do you know that almost all lawyers and judges are either Catholic or Jewish? And one of the reasons is Protestants have a very different way of looking at law from their tradition than do Catholics and Jews. Catholics and Jews, both of us have this concept of law coming from God, and there can be nothing wrong with it. We never think of changing the law. Whereas the Protestants, that's exactly what they did. They changed the thing. So in their mind, they think of changing. Catholics and Jews, no. The law is absolutely perfect, and nothing should be done to alter or change the law. However, there are ways around it. And that's what a Catholic and a Jewish lawyer does. And that's why they're so good in the field. They never question the law. It just doesn't apply in any case they've ever had, you know? And it's a way of dealing, but it's a very, very strong thing. So Jesus, when you were a lawyer, you would study how to get around the law, and God gives a lawyer that information so he can guide people around the law, okay? Not so he can impose the law on people. And when I was a youngster with great authority, our pastor used to, each year, the Feast of St. Patrick fell on a Friday, give us all a dispensation from eating meat, because of course everyone was supposed to eat corned beef and cabbage. Thank God there was no one Irish in my family. But anyway, but we did get the dispensation from meat, whether you were Irish or not. And the fact is, a pastor can't give that kind of a dispensation. Who can give that kind of a dispensation? Well, the bishop could, you know. But most people can give that kind of a dispensation to themselves. If you have good reason, you know, like for instance, you go out to someone's house for dinner and they serve prime rib. You're obliged to eat it. That's the way things are. That's politeness. And if you feel the need, take another day as a day of abstinence or something like that. You can do that too. But this idea, the Pharisees use the law to sort of cripple and hurt people. And what Jesus said is you learn the law so that you can really help people. Famously, Jesus called people not to call people father and stuff like this, to preserve the, this level. Having said that, I'd like you to know that the more noble a profession, the more dangerous it is. And I learned this from a psychiatrist. I went through a very, very serious depression, and I was under the care of a psychiatrist for 18 months. And when we finished, originally I saw him twice a week, and then eventually was seeing about once a month by the time it ended. But when you go in to see a psychiatrist, you just start talking. So we would do this. But anyway, one of the things that went on while I was seeing him, and we talked about it, was I had a priest at the mission, and the secretary in the mission told me the man was stealing from the collection. And I said, how do you know? And she says, well, he brings a collection back from the church, and you'll never find a 20 or above in it. And we, had a couple of things. And one of the counters who was counting for at the mission noticed there were no $100 bills one Sunday. He said, I specifically put a $100 bill in the collection. And so we were alert to the fact there was some stealing going on, but we as priests handle a lot of loose money that way. And it just never occurred to me that he actually would be doing it. Well, I got a phone call from her one Sunday morning. She knows I get up early, and she came in to help with something. And she said, Jim, Father X went into the safe with the collection and closed the door to the safe behind him. Now, we had a big, huge, like bank walk-in safe. And I said, okay. So I opened the door to the safe, and he was putting money in his pockets. And so what I did was I phoned the bishop, and I said, I want the man removed immediately. And the bishop said, okay, what did he do? I said, I'm not going to tell you. But I said, if you get a complaint from the next pastor, I want you to have that pastor phone me. If it's the same thing, we will both come in and see you. And the bishop said, well, okay. So then I went up to the priest, and I told him what I had done. I said, no one knows what happened here, but you're going to be moved, and you'll go to another parish. But even the bishop does not know why I've asked you to be moved. And I left it at that. It wasn't 3 months later, I called from the other pastor about money missing from collections. I don't know if you know this, but the diocese will keep track of collections in a parish and watch for a noticeable drop or a noticeable rise. Give you an example. You have a new pastor comes in, and suddenly all the collections go up. That's kind of suspicious, Or if at a point suddenly all the collections go down, it's kind of suspicious. And they watch that. So anyway, they were noticing that. So the pastor and I went to see the bishop, and the man was sent out of the diocese, forced to leave the diocese. And so I was talking to the psychiatrist about this, and the psychiatrist smiled. And he says, the problem with the priesthood is that the more noble the profession, the more dangerous it is. I said, well, why is that? And he says, because the more noble the profession, the more idealistic the people who go into it. And he said, what was going through your mind was, if you ever were caught stealing and someone kept it hidden, it would never happen again in your entire life. And he says, you presume that of every other priest. And the same thing, like with the pedophile thing, you presume for a long time the child misunderstood what the priest was doing, or you think of 1,000 reasons. And that's how those problems develop. And it's because we put priests on a pedestal, and when priests are on a pedestal, you get very used to being there. And the fact that you may think I'm a great priest is a wonderful thing. If I begin to think I'm a great priest, we have a problem, okay? And that's oftentimes is calling a person father, I begin to think of myself, the father. And that's dangerous. And in the Catholic Church, it brought about that whole thing with regards to the pedophilia. How was the pedophilia broken? The pedophilia broken by a priest in the Diocese of Boston. And the priest in the Diocese of Boston watched these people being transferred, always on the belief that if something happened, it would never happen again. Always on that belief. And he saw it happening again. And again, he went to the police and it began the investigations. We're watching that now going with the police. Do you know what broke it with regards to the police? Cameras. Now, the idea of the police doing something, they just can't get off. I was going to jury duty one time in San Luis Obispo, and we came up for jury. I forget what the trial was. We're all sitting there. And they called me up, and one lawyer asked a couple questions, the other asked a couple questions. I was on the jury. 4 people after me, a woman got up. They asked her, how do you feel about such and such? And I even forget the question, but I'll never forget her answer. Her answer was, if he weren't doing anything wrong, the police wouldn't have arrested him. They let her off the jury, and I thought, why didn't I think of that? But anyway, they got her off the jury. But a lot of people think that way. And that's been deadly for the police. If you begin to think it, I don't know if you've ever heard this, it's kind of a joke you ordinarily only hear in law schools. But the seminary I attended was on the University of San Diego, and immediately across the street on the University of San Diego was the law school. So we had law. But anyway, one of the things they used to kid about in law, there are 3 levels of law. The high level of law is for police, and it's called immunity. The second level of the law is for white people. It's called justice. The third level of the law is for non-whites, and it's called injustice. And that was a standard joke. And the police were generally immune. Well, it's not good for the police. It's not good for them any more than it was good for a priest to be seen in this kind of way. And we're going to watch it happen. Well, right now it's going on with the Boy Scouts. And what broke the Boy Scouts? Records. They go through the records and see the Boy Scouts consistently hired convicted pedophiles. Now, of course, they presumed that you're out on a camping trip. There are a lot of people around. If you're doing something, someone would notice, someone would say something. No scoutmaster's ever alone in a tent with a kid. You have a group of kids there and that sort of stuff. And then the one that'll go, that is just beginning, again, is teachers. And that's because of video cameras in schools. You never think of a teacher. And again, I go through my background. I went through Catholic school, clear through to a licentiate, which is a church degree, which was 8 years of college, 4 years of high school, 8 years of grade school, all in Catholic school, okay? So I went through that whole thing. I never saw or heard anything about it, the pedophilia thing. I was in high school. It was an all-boys high school, Augustinian priests. Never heard anything about it. And I was an altar boy from 2nd grade till the age of 28. I served Mass almost every day for that whole period. And I never saw anything about it, One of the interesting things is offenders in the police, in the teachers, in the scouts, and in the priests are a very small percentage. But because of protection, they do more damage than people in other kinds of things where they might be suspected or something. So we have to be very aware that this construction of vertical relationships is harmful to our society. And it's harmful not to the one who calls him officer, not to the one who calls me father, not to the one who calls a doctor or a scoutmaster scoutmaster. It's harmful to the one holding the title because you begin to think of yourself in a very, very different way. We must never prejudge others. And by prejudge here, I mean actually the opposite of what we normally do. We do not want to prejudge a priest as automatically innocent. We do not want to prejudge a policeman as automatically a peaceful person. Okay? And if I were to go into my life, I have examples of both. Probably the high point of my grade school was in first grade, I had to go clear across the city, change buses a couple of times in order to get from my home to where I went to first grade. Now, in those days, a kid on a bus was safe. That wasn't an issue at all. But my parents would not let me go to a public school if I had to swim to Hawaii to get to a Catholic school. So they put me in the school. Well, for the first week, and I don't know whether this is normal, for the first week of first grade, we had a half day. And when the other kids would go out to lunch, I'd take a bus, go home, and have lunch at home. But we had no afternoon class. You had lunch and then you were free. So most kids had their lunch there and they were free. I went home. So anyway, the second week, we get up to go to lunch, I leave. I get on a bus, and because of the different time of day, I got on the wrong bus. And I was lost in San Diego. The teacher, of course, immediately knows what was going on and phoned the police. In those days, someone my age walking alone on the street, they knew you were truant. So anyway, they picked me up. But my happiest memory of my childhood was as we approached the school, I gingerly turned to the policeman beside me and said, "Could we turn on the siren and lights?" And he said, "Yes." And so we came in. I was a celebrity for the rest of the year. So I have great warm feelings about that policeman. However, in college, I was part of the peace movement. And I've had exactly the opposite experiences. I remember one time, 3 of us went down to a bullfight in Tijuana. Incidentally, all 3 of us were deacons at the time in the seminary, just about to be ordained. We went down to a bullfight in Tijuana. We came back. All 3 of us were strip searched. The car was literally taken apart. They could not believe it. Now, we all had a Berkeley address, and we all had hair down to the middle of our back. I mean, we were the prototype. And what we went through a couple of times with the police is just unbelievable. But the thing is, they're good policemen, they're bad policemen. And the only time I experienced the bad ones was at that time. So we want to understand that and never prejudge. We have to realize each one of us is capable of as much, goofiness or evil as we are good. We had a professor teaching us in physics when I was in college. And when we were there, he was telling us, we were studying Hiroshima at the time and atomic energy. But he was telling us anything and any person is capable of as much good as evil. If you can't do much evil, you can't do much good. If you can't do much good, you can't do much evil. And one of the things, this professor had worked with a friend of his, a psychiatrist. They were working on a book on personalities. And one of the things they discovered in their book, that 2 people who had exactly the same personality were Francis of Assisi and Adolf Hitler. It's how focused they became. But Francis's focus was poverty. Hitler's was anti-Semitic. But it absorbed them, both of them. And if you watch the stories of Francis, he's an elderly man, he's dying. What does he tell the people around him to do? Take off all his clothes, take him outside, and lay him on the ground. He wanted to leave the earth the way he came. He wanted to return to God the way he was sent. And believe me, that's crazy. That's crazy, but good crazy, good crazy. And so to understand all of us is capable of as much good as much evil. Now, having said that, I'd also like to look a little bit about this, all men are created equal, and its understanding. I don't know how many people here have been to Williamsburg. I'd ask you to raise your hands, but I don't think I'd notice anyway. So the idea at Williamsburg is it's set up according to the very early days of our country, and a wonderful place if you've never been there. But depending on how long you're there, you can attend different kind of acting sessions. And I went to the court. So you go to the court, And the group of us are standing there, and they say, we'll ask you to sit up here, and we'll pick a jury, okay? We all sat down. He says, remember, the mantra of our country is all men are created equal. That is the mantra on which we're building this. So I said, I'll ask all you women to stand and move over to the gallery. So the women went over to the gallery. And he says, I'd like all of you who do not own land to stand up and move over to the gallery. I ask all of you that are not white, and I mean, we aren't just talking blacks, we're talking Hispanics, Orientals. If you are not white, stand up and go over to the gallery. And then the final one, the one that did me in, if you aren't an Episcopalian, stand up and move to the gallery. So I went to the gallery. But the fact of the matter is, for them, all men are created equal. Was a man owning land, Episcopalian, and probably British, not just, probably British. Now, if you watch the history of our country, we come to a different understanding of that. So that as we go on, we discover that all men created equal actually included men who were not white. And then we discovered that all men are created equal actually included women. And if you look at the evolution, it is an upward evolution. We can take great pride in that. It is an upward evolution, but it is slow. Because with the recognition of the equality of women, and particularly with regards to the vote, do you realize just now we're beginning to see equal numbers of women in government and equal numbers of women running companies? So it's taken that long. Well, we've never actually made that commitment with regards to the blacks. The commitment that they must be brought into this equality. This thing must work, must be built, so that the equality brings in all of these different groups. And another thing about this is to be very, very careful. I guess I would mention two other things. We're just beginning to recognize the equality of children. Children in a society did not have much say as children, except through parents. If you had benevolent parents, that I think most of us do, you were in pretty good shape. If you didn't, you weren't. Because it was very difficult for you to bring charges against your parents and stuff like that. So we're just beginning with that. And you begin to see the tip of the iceberg with regards to animals. So that we're objecting to the way certain animals. But do you know that all men are created equal? Do you know what men really means? And we'll fully understand this one day. Life. All life has value, and it is equal in the sense that it is life itself. And all life deserves protection, deserves this sort of thing, So, but they'll get there. They'll get there. My dogs and I have been praying for it for a long time, but they'll get there, I'm sure. I'd like to talk a little bit more about this Black Lives Matter. One of the really important things in a movement like this is to not let the nature of the movement disrupt the goal of the movement. You reach a point in your life where you have a lot of experience. But when I was involved in the peace movement, one of the very interesting things that was going on, there are some people who were so upset in going about this that they caused violence. But it's up to the members of the movement to police that. The police can police the movement, but they can't police individuals in the movement. That's up to the movement itself. And in the peace movement, we tried to do that when we could. But we also found over a period of time there were people planted by the Nixon administration to make sure a peaceful demonstration was not. And we're finding out there's some of that in the Black Lives Matter movement too. But you and I need to be able to look at it and say, is what they want right? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. if we want the America envisioned by our forefathers. If that's what we want, the resounding is a resounding yes. They are equal to everyone in every way, and we need to make sure that works out that way. So that's really true. The movement itself, I think people involved in the movement need to be better able to police themselves. They get in some situations. We had an interesting example in San Luis. In San Luis, we've been having the Black Lives Matter movement for quite a while. A couple of times they've stopped the traffic on Highway 101. But other than that, I think the first or second night, huge crowd downtown, and 2 of the businesses had their windows smashed. But curiously, no one took anything, and there was never another window broken on any of the things. And the thing is, the people in the movement policed it. The people in the movement stopped the people who broke the windows. There were just a few people who thought everyone would follow them in, but they didn't. And so they policed their movement in the town. And this idea, we have to be very, very careful. I oftentimes think of being a teenager. And each one of us, to think of our own teenage years, one of the most important things in being a teenager is the ability to demonstrate and grow into independence. But if we look back on things we did to our parents and things that went on in an effort to establish that independence, like our parents would admit, our independence was important to them. God knows they wanted us out of the house, okay? And our independence was important to us, okay? But it's something you kind of grow into. And we were really, not good about it. I think God's punishment is to send teenagers to most of us too. But anyway, as we notice this, all men, I'll just say, all people are created equal. As we notice this, all people are created equal, it expands us and demands more of us constantly, And I think people need to be able to step up to situations when we see someone taken advantage of or race things to the best of our ability, to be able to make sure things are dealt with. It's being a white person in the United States, the only place I've ever really experienced it actually is in Salinas. And in Salinas, where I experienced it, was in Macy's, where they would always wait on anyone who spoke Spanish first. All the personnel are Spanish, and it's easier for them to speak. And I'm sure that's not the policy of Macy's and stuff like that. But that was the first time I ever experienced it. I may have shared with you before one of the reasons why I don't wear a collar. When I was first ordained a deacon, not yet a priest, but deacons wear a Roman collar. So I was wearing a Roman collar and went back to New York. My parents were in Rochester at the time. My dad was an executive in Stromberg Carlson. So I went back to Rochester for winter. And I went downtown. I was going to buy some Christmas gifts. And as a Californian, if you can cross in the middle of the street, you do. That's the way it's done. So I was crossing in the middle of the street. There were policemen at the corners. Both of them came running towards me, which in California would mean I was about to get a jaywalking ticket. But they didn't. They stopped the traffic both directions. So I, humiliated, walked over. When I went into the store, I found what I wanted. I got in line. The woman from behind the counter came back, took me in front of everyone. I don't know what they were thinking, but I know what I would have been thinking. And she waited on me, and Father, thank you very much. Well, took a minute. I never wore the collar again. And that's that whole thing of call no man Father. If you want to go to confession to me, you can say, bless me, Father. But I'm not Father when I'm in line at a store. I am not Father when I'm jaywalking. feel free to hit me with your car if you see me out there. But this whole idea, in California, you can't do that. In New York, you get awards for it. No one's safe on the streets in New York. But this idea of understanding, we don't need this thing for us. I think if we were to go back, way back to Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, those people, and see the ideal they presented, the ideal of a country where all people were created equal. That's almost an unbelievable ideal, an amazing ideal. But if you look at this country, we have systematically marched towards that ideal, slowly, painfully slowly. But we are, in fact, going towards that ideal. And you know, the fact that we have not arrived at that ideal has not prevented us from being the envy of every other person in the world. We still could arrive one day. I think that's a long day in the future, because I think there are things that need to be equal that we haven't yet even discovered. But our marching towards that ideal makes us the envy of the world. And I think this is just another step. Black Lives Matter is just another step. We need to work more diligently to bring about the equality of blacks. The numbers in Congress, it seems to me there are more black congresswomen than congressmen. And I think they're there because of the improvement of the state of women, not because of the improvement of the state of blacks. So we really need to work on the state of blacks and Hispanics and Chinese, that we need to work. We want one day. Wouldn't it be wonderful if only this happens at the end of time? Let's say the day before the world ends, that we could stand before God as a perfectly equal society. The existence of our country would have been verified. Just to reach that goal. But I look at what we've become even trying to go after it. And this is my prayer. My prayer is that we will take the pandemic that has revealed to us the inadequacies of the way the blacks are served, and pointed out that as another problem, and pointed simultaneously to the way police are handling things, and that we learn from those things, we move away from that. And the one bad piece of news I have to give you is, when you solve one problem, there's another waiting behind it. And we will find something else, someone else. But let's just keep on with this. I look at the church. I told you about the popes in stages. I don't think this is any secret, but the big obstacle to the reunion, particularly the Orthodox with us, is the position of the Pope. And it's not that he's head of the church. They have no problem with that. They say he's the first among equals. It's the way the Pope lived. The Pope lived as a king. He didn't live as a bishop. He didn't even live as an archbishop or cardinal. He lived as a king. And what we've watched is our popes walk away from that throne and walk away from that crown. Why? In the Catholic Church, we're walking towards the reunion of all Christians. Make no mistake about it. The United States, we're marching towards the union of all people. Don't make any mistake about it. It's a march. And it looks in different ways. Different ways it looks differently. But understand, that is what we're about. And if we don't accomplish it in our lives, I would love to stand before God and say, I brought the entire church one tiny step closer to reunion, and I brought my country closer to the vision of equality. Because to tell you the truth, that's actually all God expects of me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention.